Hi, team. So, this week we were talking a little bit more about the scope and ideas inside the human aspect of the charter and what you want to include. And I kind of thought a little bit about this myself, and I just jumped some brain kind of actions that were in my mind from our readings. And I came up with kind of 7 elements of success in the past that I've discovered. Number one is always that executive support. And Olson's book clearly defines it in the human aspects of project management, how the stakeholders have to support it, but your executive team has to be on board. Getting them to sign off is always a rough part, but constant milestones and addresses to the executive support team is always something I found that really works well. Stakeholders engagement is something that's kind of on the political side a lot of times, that we don't want to usually engage them, let the executive staff talk to them. But I think it's always an important part to have updates to these people, especially if it's on a grant funded project where you have to do this, which I did a lot for the state and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. But it also clarifies the objectives. We all know scope creep and how they change. Milestones are always that key thing, because all your employees always understand, or whatever the agile team leaders might be, always understand that they're meeting those milestones. If they are increasing because of scope creep, it's something we have to think about. That's a leadership model you guys should really start thinking about. And when we look at total quality management, especially in the Six Sigma models, they really deal with kind of an underlying tone of leadership taking those quality control measurements constantly and before milestones. The support, again, is more so a fear factor always for my past experiences with the executive staff, because they're the ones who can pull funding and put it somewhere else or allocate team members. If you look at the MITRE model, they understand that there's a constant fluidity inside of all their projects. So team members are encouraged to actually jump ship if they have downtime and put their specializations inside of another agile team and then jump back. That way the scope stays kind of controllable but really fluid too, of what your individual role is. You have more of a time fluidity as well. Project managers, when they're defining these milestones, are interested in making sure they hit peak deadlines to stay on track with the net charts and the work breakdown structures. But they're also the political shield, I like to call them, for employees, especially in the IT field. So you can stay focused on, or the employees can stay focused on, getting the coding done, making sure the network's getting done on pace and on time for the overall project. They also handle the HR conflicts and negotiations. In the book that I suggested to you guys of IT managers' handbooks, there's a couple great chapters just on the idea of negotiations for contracts with vendors. Is a great point of always trying to understand that if you can't control that third party issue, you should have a good contract. And that's where HR can help you build good core value systems into a contract to work with third party agents so you can cut them free. This is something that a lot of scopes do not go inside of and think about in a charter building. Is actually trying to or deal with third-party vendors, which is so predominant in use today, especially in the IT field. Requirements have that functional and the technical aspect, but I still rely on the number one place we always fail is that human capital area. We have to invest more than just time. It's relationship building, and that's why a lot of the things I'm telling you to read about, a lot of the plans, are specific with the idea of relation building tactics. If you look at some of the Japanese philosophies, they're very, very intuitive about building community, building relationships, building a whole inside structure, core values that everybody buys into. Whether you are a person just doing upgrades on a computer system, working on a legacy system, you're building new code, you're changing COBOL over to .NET, you're doing something massive. It's all about this, everybody adopting the same values. They share lunches together, they share meals together, they go out afterwards. It's a whole community aspect. Kyocera is a great company that has a 12-stage model for this, and I'll try to talk a little bit about that again later on the semester. I have a piece I did when I was actually introduced to some of the VPs at Kyocera. I'll probably put up into this course when I was in San Diego over the summer. It's really interesting how they adopt different ideas and concepts as a whole team. And they make sure before you start your role, your position, you have learned their core values and their stages and understand that everybody has value and worth, but everybody follows these core values to a T. So I'll probably post that here soon. Scope and milestones. I can't tell people, especially new managers, how important it is to really set the milestones for employees, especially in larger projects where you have 3 or 4 teams working together. You have to have a pinpoint, and inside these milestones, you can't just have one. You have to have kind of a phased approach, is what I always did. So mini milestones is a good way to think about it. It's a way to kind of look at determining the scope and breaking it down into an internal work breakdown structure so that every single milestone is met with mini milestones to understand if there's mitigating circumstances or problems already in one team that's going to fluctuate or take a while. This might go back to the idea of the executive branch, as what I'm bringing up, that a lot of times the funding or the third-party vendor who's bringing you the aspect or the machine or the hardware might not meet their milestone. And how does that conflict with everything that you're going to do? So you a lot of times need to build into them a Slack program, overestimate the time a little bit, and your budget as well. Determining the schedules really has a lot to do with that human capital. You have to be intuitive and figure people are going to get sick. People are going to go on vacation. Accidents will happen. Leaders will get fired. I was on one project where the president got fired. When within minutes a new president was approached by the board and brought in, everything was changed. Creep went advanced. We had to redo everything, but luckily I had built in there a massive problem area and scheduled budget, scheduled extra time in the milestones, and so we were able to recoup and keep on track and change to the new scope creep that the new executive president wanted. So planning and planning, planning. I know this is redundant to some of you who have already been in the management side of this, but I like to let others who have not, and a lot of students in this course have not ever had the opportunity to build a charter or work on mission statement or core values. But it reflects back to number one, thinking about the roles and making sure they're all functioning. You have the key people. And looking at that executive branch and understanding that, as I like to say, the Bullman and Deals structure of who's leading you. If it's a very political person, you need to build in there influence factors such as time and extra budget to compensate for somebody who's very persuasive, who can be turned or altered by a board or outside political forces. HR, we don't really have to worry so much about that type of structure. It's very formal. But you know, when you're dealing with the symbolic or the structural leader itself, it might be the father of the company, and he can be out with his friends for dinner, and one come back with a great idea, which is a small company I work for, and he said, we're going to change everything we do on our process and planning. We're also going to change our line. Really changed everything we did. So you kind of have to be fluid in that and think about implementing your self-disaster recovery strategies, which I'll talk a little bit about maybe next week, and just thinking about things that can happen overall. This is all part of that initial charter and scope that you want to think about when you're building for teams. You kind of have to be their protector as a manager. You have to build for accidents and problems. More importantly, you have to be in constant methods of tracking success to make sure you are on success. You can't just say we're going to have 5 milestones inside our major milestone, or whatever you want to term them. You have to actually have a tracking aspect. In today's digital world, you might be building a platform yourself just to do this. A huge part of the planning mission too is thinking about how you're going to measure success in the closeout. How are you going to look at this and look for lessons learned? What are you going to take from this perfect project maybe and move it on to the next one to make sure the next ones, or if you had a huge disaster, how are you going to measure that disaster, what effects it had, the ripple down, and learn from this? I put in here back just a neat little graphic I found. I put in and detailed the structural frame, political frame, human resources frame, symbolic. If you'd like to go back over it, you can. Just freeze this. But inside these charter proposals, you really need to have the business case and understanding of why. It gives you the financial analysis, looks over the triple constraints of any project, looks at the requirements to help you set up the milestone schedule. Inside of that, there's many tools you can use today for success measurement, and we can get into that a little bit later this semester. But I'm more interested in you thinking about a little bit today about the risks, the mitigations. That's why I asked you the challenge question I did. Thinking about alternative solutions and recommendations and putting these into your proposal ahead of time. That way, if something does happen, disaster strikes, you're prepared. They call this continuity planning for a lot of people. How are we going to continue the business, manage our obligations if the president dies, if the board fires the CIO, if something happens such as a power loss? This is where Slack comes in a lot of times in the milestones, or sub-plans, the recovery plans. And I'm hitting on all this, which is something that I love to do, look at is the third order consequences of every action in a plan. The short-term and long-term type of building in for crisis. And this could be a crisis communication to where you might want to have, and I always have inside of my charters with my team, a chain of command. What happens if I'm fired? What happens if I die? What happens if they have a crisis and I'm not there? I'm on vacation myself. What's the chain of command, and how do you work with this communication to, one, your CIO, your executive branch, your stakeholders? There should need to be a clear chain of command and responsibilities on who says what and how. And a lot of times it's good to have in there a policy, and human resources departments can usually help you write this, on what you're allowed specifically to address to any stakeholders or outside agencies. And in most cases, you refer this to your public relations department. So it's something you'd want to think about in a charter as well, actually establishing a protocol for that. Disasters a lot of times happen, but you have to think about, because you're a manager now, the safety of your employees. We have OSHA, we have all these different things if you're in factories, but in this world, it might be as simple as moving your people out of the building to a safe location and working virtual, sending them home on a day in the south when an ice storm hits, early, participating and looking at weather. These are all factors that we have to think about today. Cyber response incidents is usually the first thing people think about in our business, but it's not the only one. We have to think about that human capital aspect of things that happen, and unfortunately, today we all see it in the news, violent things happen. Do you have a contingency plan for your employees in case someone comes in the building? What do you do? Do you need to bring in a specialist from the criminal justice department in a local area to talk to you about incident responses? How you talk to stakeholders to communicate that you are well, the project's online, everything's safe in these areas. Work breakdown structures can have a lot of planning developed inside of them. The overall project, they have NAT charts, they can have scope phases. The critical path, task delays, or what is something you need to think about in here as well. How flexible are you building your actual schedule, your work breakdown schedule? Think about the flexibility in this plan. Is it available and open to change? Are you open to evaluating the risk before you open this door up to your constituents? Do you allow your employees the freedom to say, hey, I know that this won't happen, or this seems really irrational time frame? You have to be able to be open as a manager to let them reject your plan and your continuation plan. It might go against company policy and you get shut down by the executive branch. So some different things to think about, and I started bringing this into the course, and I want you to think about it because a lot of you have never had management experience and you're just now hoping to get into, and that's what our course is kind of designed to give you an introduction to this, but what it means to work with human capital and how we can be success and help others. I'll bring in some of the ideas from that other book and text that I brought in and talk to you a little bit about the actual management of people and the philosophy of working with the human capital aspect and vendors too, probably next week. But for now, have a great day. Think a little bit this week with your challenge of what would be an influencing factor that would change everything you've already planned. Have a great day, everyone. We'll talk soon.